Hello YouTube. Let me continue my investigation of the unusual properties of snails, and some of them quite paranormal maybe, or esoteric, call it whatever you want, but you need to find out. For example, about the medieval instant gastropod messaging. Oh yes. Let's start from the beginning. Catharism is a dualist religion from Bulgaria, which was introduced in Western Europe in the 12th century. The Cathars condemned the matter and the flesh as the domain of evil, and therefore rejected the Christian resurrection. They also denounced the wealth and corruption of the Roman Catholic Church. The popularity of the Cathars in the Toulouse area and northern Italy scared Pope Innocent III, and he called for a crusade in 1208. The heretic state of Languedoc was besieged, and a cruel, horrifying war came about. It took the Crusaders almost 60 years to defeat the Albigenses. The Albigenses crusade was a crusade against the people of the Languedoc, which is now part of France. It is also known as the Cathar Crusade. Albigenses took their name from the town of Albi in Languedoc in southern France. The Crusades ended in 1244 with the fall of the Chateau of Montségur. Although Cathars were still being burned alive well into the 14th century. The Inquisition was founded to exterminate the last vestiges of the Cathar belief. Relatively little is known about the Albigensian beliefs, since the sect was repressed and most evidence destroyed by Inquisition and their allies. But not all. A well-known writer in Russia and historian Nikolai Nepomniachtchi found and wrote about the remaining documents of the period containing information regarding the mysterious abilities of the Albigensian leaders to communicate instantaneously and guide battles against the invaders. The secret of the Cathar instant messaging was partially uncovered when a French doctor, Henri Fabricius, published an article in the mid-19th century about biological telepathy. He claimed to be a descendant of one of those four Cathars who were able to leave the doomed Montségur castle through a secret underground passage. Working in the ruins of the castle, Dr. Fabricius had found documents of the long-gone days of the Albigensian Cathar resistance. One document contained a detailed description of the telegraph used by the Cathars to communicate between their castles and fortresses. The Crusader war against the people of Languedoc was one of the sieges rather than the war of the open battle, so they besieged one fortress after another, or castle. Medieval towns were generally surrounded by defensive walls, just like castles. Indeed, there is little distinction between castles and fortified towns in Western Europe of the period. Here is the process. A special pair of snails was used to transmit and receive information. The pair would be separated and one would be placed in the transmitting station, while the other was taken to the receiving station. A special team of observers was stationed there around the clock. When the snail became agitated, it would be placed in a special groove where walls had images of Latin alphabet. When the snail dropped at a certain letter, the team would record that letter. Letters were made into words. The snail at the transmitting station was pricked with a safety pin and then placed in the similar groove. When the snail reached a certain letter, it was pricked again. It stopped, and at the same time its sister, at a distance of many miles, stopped too. According to Nepomniachtchi, another article about similar ability of snails was authored by Hugo Zeitman and published in 1878. I think he called it correctly the experience of using the most unhurried creature as the fastest messenger, and he met snails. By lining in a chain one after another, so that they come into contact with each other, the experimenter irritated with an electric shock one of them. For example, the first one in the chain, and that would be in the tail part. At the same time, all other snails also amicably, so to say, pressed or pulled in their tails. But most interesting thing was that if the snails were divided and carried to different rooms, their reactions were maintained the same. According to the press or newspapers at the time, the first session of the radio communication between the old and the new world was carried out in the 19th century, and it wasn't Marconi at all. The authors of the sensation again were French, Alex and Benoit. They had two snail alphabets, each with as many individuals as the letters in the French alphabet. Each pair was first brought into contact with each other in pairs. After such entry into communication, snails were disconnected. One snail alphabet remained in pairs, the other sent overseas. When the transmission began, the snails in pairs located in the compartment with the corresponding letter received an electric shock. According to the authors of the work, the corresponding snail of the second set in America behaved as if it also received an electric shock. And in 1933, a newspaper in Berlin, Germany, published an article about experiments conducted on snails. The male species were placed on white squares of chessboard in one room, while the females were placed on the same squares of a chessboard located in another room. They say up to 800 kilometers away. As soon as as males were moved to the black squares, so did the females in the other room located far away. They also moved. In other words, playing snails in chess on the simplest code, you could use them to send the right message. This is not about snails, but very interesting. In 1933, Soviet entomologist Fabry worked with butterflies. He marked the males with paint and took them 6 to 8 kilometers from home. Then, in a wire garden on the balcony of his forest cottage, he hung an unfertilized female. After a while, some of the tagged males returned. Fabry suggested that the signal was transmitted by something like radio waves. Judging by the time, the male, which was removed, up to 8 kilometers, immediately reacted to the appearance of the female and rushed in her direction on the shortest path and with fastest possible speed. Yet convincing and technically and methodically literate studies on telepathy between animals were conducted in the USSR in 1967. However, openly, more or less, in media or press, they appeared only in 1984 in the book titled Electromagnetic Fields in the Biosphere, which was published in a very small circulation and distributed on special lists. You could not get it if you were not part of the special group. Okay? Judging by the content of the article, the experiments were conducted by a large group of people. However, the author of the 10-page work was only one person, somebody named V.P. Perov. Interesting. But let's look more at the unusual properties of snails. According to Nature News, I would say in 2003, the type of the snails called Literaria irorata raise fungus on grasses, so that they have continuous food supply. They chew grass to prepare it for cultivation. Then they defecate and they chewed up blades to fertilize their crop. The snails return to the wound and eat the fungus that would have grown in it. Does this fungal injection into plants prove that their intelligence is similar to that of human mushroom farmers? I have already discussed the fascinating and anomalous world of the black smokers, those underwater mine mineral geysers. That's in my video about Mariana Strange. Hydrothermal vents are fractured cracks in the Earth's surface where geothermally heated water pulses through. Usually a hydrothermal vent is found where hot magma is close to the surface crust, as in volcanically active locations. This is where a very interesting snail lives and I guess enjoys itself, because black smokers eject high-temperature dark water that was once trapped in molten rock beneath the Earth's crust. The water pressure is very high at the depths at which these vents occur, and the superheated water does not boil. Cooler currents near the black geysers are rich in minerals and provide the iron sulfide compounds that the snail uses in their metallic scales. Let's use the simpler name, scaly food gastropod. So it's a species of deep sea hydrothermal vent snail. It's a marine gastropod mollusk. And I don't want to go too much into scientific language, but the shell of the is of a unique construction with 3 layers. The outer layer consists of iron sulfides. The middle layer is equivalent to the organic periostracum found in other gastropods, and the innermost layer is made of aragonite. The food, sometimes people refer to it as a tail, but I'll call it the food, is also unusual, being armored at the sides with iron mineralized sclerites. This vent endemic gastropod is known only from the deep sea hydrothermal vents in the Indian Ocean, where it has been found at depths of down below, deep, I would say about 2,400 to 2,800 meters, or about 1.5 to 1.7 miles. This species is considered to be one of the most peculiar deep sea hydrothermal vent gastropods, and it is the only known living animal that incorporates iron sulfide into its skeleton. Its heart is, proportionally speaking, unusually large for any animal. The heart comprises 4% of its body volume. Yes, and Swedish and American scientists discovered a unique snail that has metal-plated armor on its body and underside of its food. The creature bears a mass of interlocking iron base plates on its body and the base of its food. This unusual gastropod creature, like I said, lives in the Indian Ocean near the, and pay attention to this area, Kairei, or Kairei hydrothermal vent. The scientists refer to it as a very strange little beast. Again, it's the first animal discovered that uses iron sulfides for its structural purposes. It's just one of the interesting snails that are found out. I'm trying to give you more outside of just this. There was another one. This was discovered by American scientists who were studying another very unusual gastropod. And snails that lives near coral reefs contains a chemical poison that might be useful as a painkiller. Studies have shown that the poison might even be stronger than the morphine in relieving pain. Medicines derived from the chemical structure of the poison may have great potential for patients suffering from severe pain. So you see where else snails could be very much important. Now let's look at something else. Researchers of the Max Planck Institute for Biochemistry in Munich have completed experiments of developing the first snail chip. They directly interfaced a neural network with a silicon semiconductor by growing snail synapses over the chip. When stimulated, the interlaced snail nerve cells transmitted electric pulses to trip a switch to make the circuit go live. German scientists plan to build a system with 15,000 neuron transistor sites on the road to an eventual computational model of brain activity. Apparently, because neural cells from snails are somewhat larger than human, they're easier to see and manipulate. Their plan is to build a system of this size, and It's going to help with the studies of the brains, like I said. Scientists are becoming increasingly adept at studying biological systems in non-invasive manner. And that's how they discovered a way to measure brainwave activity from snails. This is an incredible discovery, and stay tuned for anything that comes from Germany, from that institute pertaining to snails. But there's something else from the United States. An American neurobiologist, Richard Satterley, has conducted scientific studies of a swimming snail at the Arizona State University. He and his colleagues have learned that snail nerves are organized in groups that control certain functions or circuits, and these circuits modules combine to work with other circuits and sometimes take on sharply different functions depending on what other circuits they're working with. This leads to a neurophysiological understanding of complex behavior. Please ponder the idea of how snails, should I say, think and operate. The snails are known to be very well adapted to the environment, to their environment. Its soft and flexible food adapts to any surface. The negative pressure exerted by the food sole allows the snail to crawl in any position, even with its shell down. The best known sense of snail is their tactile touch senses. The snail's static sense position enables the snail to recover into a normal position of the shell, protecting its body after being turned over. With only two brain cells to rub together when making decisions, it would be fair to say that snails are not that smart, according to some scientists. Nevertheless, their simple decision-making process, recently discovered by scientists, could be used to design more efficient robot brains. Now, researchers from the University of Sussex found that complex decisions made by snails were achieved again by using just two cells. One that tells the snail whether it is hungry or not, and the other lets it know if the food is present. Okay, I think people found more complicated traits of snails, but let's continue. How else can snails help humankind? Recent research shows that snail saliva may have antioxidant and regenerative effects on human skin. According to a study by scientists of the Anatomist University of Madrid, snail saliva could be used in therapies to regenerate damaged skin tissues. And in Chile, they should be given credit for discovering the apparent benefits of snail slime. There is a family that started selling snails for food, escargot, to the French wholesalers back in the 1980s. The business was not a great success, but it made an unexpected discovery while harvesting the animals. The secretion filtrate seemed to heal cuts and grazes caused by handling the metal cages containing the snails. So this is another property, snail slime, that can heal cuts and grazes. Now in South Korea they found out, and they put the snail slime on the map by introducing it into its products, and I think it's made its way to the West as well. And BBC reported recently that garden snails have a homing instinct. But I want to go back to China, since we started with China. A small but an important step toward was made aboard the Chinese Shenzhou 8 spacecraft. Shenzhou 8 was an unmanned flight of China's Shenzhou program. It was launched in China by a Long March 2F rocket, which lifted from the GQ-1 Satellite Launch Center. Very interesting, by the way, for those who study China and its space development. The results were made public sometime later. Among the payload was an unusual container carrying a special microgravity experiment. Inside the vessel, filled with nutrient solution and two types of algae, was a trio of snail astronauts belonging to the Bulinus australianus genus. This small tropical freshwater snail weighs only 0.1 grams and has very modest needs when it comes to oxygen consumption. That's the reason why it was chosen to travel to space and prove whether it can survive with a miniature closed-loop life support system. Unfortunately, after the landing, only one of the snail astronauts was found alive. But there was some other discovery pertaining to the snails, and I'm waiting for it to become more public. But that's very interesting that snails are now taken into space. Maybe they came from space, who knows, 500 million years ago or more. We should take a look at animals that surround us in this world, and sometimes don't take them for granted, but understand that they are very complex mechanisms, so to say, and some of the things that they possess can actually help humans. And I'm sure someday we'll find out more about the wonderful, albeit paranormal properties of the gastropods, and let's put them to good use. Thank you for your support. If you can help my research, please do so through Patreon, link in the description. I have more videos about paranormal Eurasia and much more to bring to you. Thank you.